All right, well, I have 8:30 here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alex Tarantino. I'm the chair of the Education Committee for Preservation Delaware. Today is our second day of the annual conference, so we're really excited to have you all here. So before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody about some housekeeping items on Zoom. So all attendees are muted, but if you have a question that you want to ask of our speakers, you can use the Q&A button that's located at the bottom of your screen. If you're having technical difficulties or need to get in touch with me or one of the panelists, you can use the chat function for that. We'll be recording this and all presentations from the conference, and they will be available on Preservation Delaware's website in a few weeks, so please look out for that. And also, we just want to give a big thanks to all of our 2022 conference sponsors. This is a big undertaking, and we're really grateful for their support. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dee Durham, our president.
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Good morning. On day 2 of our conference, I am the current president of the board of Preservation Delaware. And I'll just put a plug in, if I may, for our in-person gathering this evening, Preservation Delaware's annual meeting at starting at 5 o'clock at Historic Diet Mills, Cooch Diet Mill, which is actually owned by the state and managed by the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. If you've never been inside, it's way cool. So you're welcome to get tickets. We'll put a link in the chat to still reserve a spot to come down. We have wine and cheese, tours of the mill, and a brief, I promise, annual meeting. So hope to see everyone in person later on today. To go ahead and get started with today's first session, I'm pleased to welcome my county council colleague, John Cartier, who is a staunch preservationist and has been working on preservation ordinances long before I joined him on the council. So, and the Philadelphia Pike is definitely one of his loves. So he's going to share with you today the historic features of Philadelphia Pike and its nearby communities. And without further ado, I guess I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Dee. And I want to thank you for this kind invitation to present my PowerPoint about the Philadelphia Pike. It's a real privilege to be here with Preservation Delaware and to expose and educate people a little bit about this really historical and scenic pathway. I just want to give a little caveat. This is not a history of the Philadelphia Pike. It's more or less a kind of snapshot and an impressionistic view through PowerPoint of this pathway and the communities, and noting some major historical buildings that dot along that pathway. And I'm coming to you virtually today at this meeting, and my wife and I own a property in Hollyoak, 1 block off the Philadelphia Pike, in a property we call Pasco Hall, and it's 100 years old, probably 2 years ago. We want to try to commemorate that, but during the pandemic, we couldn't really do that. But just to kind of opening remarks, this PowerPoint was prepared by myself and other folks in the wake of the fact that we had an application through DelDOT to have the Philadelphia Pike designated a scenic and historic byway. And that study was conducted for the application by the Center for Historic Architecture and Design. David Ames chairs and manages that very important scholarly group at the University of Delaware. And I was a data collector. This goes back probably 2002, 2003. I was a data collector, as a part of that, volunteer part of that effort. And that's what ignited my real kind of love of the Philadelphia Pike region. And now, unfortunately, we were denied that scenic and historic byway designation. And Dee and I continue to have discussions about how to get that accomplished. But so that's a little bit of an intro. And the other thing, and just to throw out there, this whole segment of roadway we start in Wilmington at the Brandywine Bridge, and we go all the way to the Pennsylvania line. So not a history, a little taste of the greatness that is the Philadelphia Pike area and the great historical communities that are line it for people to get a real appreciation. So to keep alive the spirit of that application and a lot of energy that went behind it, never to give up, as they say. Let's begin, Pete.
Okay.
So again, the Philadelphia Pike is a really unique pathway in Delaware. It's in the Brandywine 100, in the eastern portion of the Brandywine 100, very proximate to the Delaware River. And it's a roadway, as you can see from this historical photos, probably from the 20s. It rolls along the Piedmont Hills. You know, Brandywine 100 is a piece of the Piedmont in Delaware, and it's on its eastern extreme, and it rolls along, you know, as you can see here. So this is one view, probably from the 1920s, ironically very close to the neighborhood where I live. Okay, next. So this pathway has a very profound and deep history. The Pike is the King's Highway, and that was built on the order of Charles II between 1650 and 1735 to link Charleston, South Carolina, and Boston, Massachusetts. And this is our piece of it along the Piedmont of Delaware. And so you can see that, you know, back in the day, the idea was to create the I-95 of the day to link all the major centers of English settlement, you know, from Boston all the way to Charleston. So this little map vignette here is out of the De Beers Atlas, just giving you a focus. You're focusing on the Philadelphia Pike next. We call this road Delaware's Road to Independence and Progress because it is one of the first modern roadways in Delaware and its history. Also, in its history, you know, we've also had it designated a pathway as part of the Washington-Rochambeau route. This is the combined land and sea movement of the British and American troops that marched down the King's Highway, as it were, and they came through this area on their way to Yorktown, where in the only sea battle that the French ever probably won against the English, the reinforcement of Cornwallis's forces was prevented, and you know the kind of like final battle that led to the British throwing in the towel on fighting colonists was had at Yorktown. But this route provided, you know, for the combined movement of Washington and Rochambeau's troops, and we recognized it to this day. So it's a pathway of our story is on the struggle to become an independent nation, and it's also about the progress of our country in developing a modern road system. So one of the most interesting pictures here is the one on the left. You can see that's on Penny Hill. And that's when they first developed, you know, a paved surface for the Philadelphia Pike. And at that time, it was brick that was installed. So you can get an idea as, you know, motor cars became common, vehicles more common, they paved these, you know, routes. So we were one of the early ones that had that happen. Next. So we're going to start down on the Brandywine, which is the Piedmont stream. You know, Wilmington has coastal river and a, you know, coastal plain river and a Piedmont river, and the Brandywine is the Piedmont River. So here's at the base of Market Street, from the Market Street Bridge in Wilmington, you're looking downstream and upstream from there. Go next one. And of course, one of the early historical preservation efforts that were made is Brandywine Village. I don't know if people know this, but that preservation effort goes way back in the 1960s. And today you can go to Brandywine Village and see a lot of really old buildings still, been reutilized, adaptively reused. So here we have this 18th century Blue Rock Mill Village where our road begins. This is kind of the beginning of the pathway. Brandywine Village was established circa 1735 by members of the Shipley family, used the power of the Brandywine River to power their mills. So the fall line, that water tumbling out of the hills, creates the usefulness of the river for water power. This allowed the area to enter the industrial age well before the arrival of the steam engine. Many other prominent families, including the Tatnalls, the Gilpins, the DuPonts, did the same. The site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1971. Again, very early successful preservation efforts, and the place still has a tremendous amount of dynamism and vitality today. You can go, oh, one last thing. So one of the other things that Brandywine Village was very famous for, their flour that they milled was known as superfine. So the superfine lane, ever been down there? It was a really high quality flour sought after by people all over the colonies and for export. And they used to bring the ships up to the Brandywine right to the point where, there was just enough draft to hold these vessels. And that's where these mills were developed. I don't think there are any mills left there anymore. I think some of the buildings have been kind of adaptively reused. Next. So again, a lot of vitality in Brandywine Village to this day. We live in an area with historical buildings that remind us of our heritage, and we are rich by their presence. And you can see the kind of, hodgepodge of things that they're here. Early stone buildings, brick buildings. Then you got, it looks like an old bank building that's more or less, I think, Art Deco in style. So again, where the tendency is just kind of, tear everything down and build bland, new buildings. These old buildings really give us a rich cultural heritage that we can take advantage of. Next. Here's another great example, new life for an historical property. Headquarters of Delaware Architectural Foundation in Brandywine Village. The stylish cupola was added in 1820, and the bells rang when the Marquis de Lafayette visited in 1824 in his grand tour. Next. Here's another great story. It could have been a really ugly story. The former St. John's Episcopal Cathedral. The Episcopal parish here, ceased functioning, and this Gothic revival building was fortunately taken over by a local nonprofit, refit, and continues to serve the community today. Riverview Cemetery. This is a really important thing for people to look at. Riverview Cemetery it's the largest cemetery in Delaware, and it was founded in 1872. And it languished for a while under poor management, but a local friends group was formed. Dr. Lee Anderson is the chair of that. The Friends of Historic Riverview Cemetery, and they've come back to, revitalize the cemetery, clean it up, and honor the graves of our fellow Delawareans who are veterans. It goes back to the Civil War. And this is the other important thing. It's always been open to people of all races and creeds. We have over 30,000 burials at Riverview Cemetery. It really is worth it. It's on North Market. It's worth going through, taking a ride. And there was it was built on a kind of architectural style that, was, quite elaborate in its day. That's how they, nice cemeteries were constructed, and they're bringing all that back. So Riverview Cemetery, really interesting place to visit. Next. So we're going out toward the limits of the city. We're going into Penrose neighborhood, and it's an area that kind of transitions from the urban city environment to more suburbia. So you can see here, you have in that same vicinity, an urban row house, and then your suburban bungalow, which the bungalows were really early suburban houses and democratized home ownership in the United States. And that's a really fine example of that in Penrose. Next. Again, still on North Market in the Penrose community. So this hardware store is now out of business. But in its day, Farnan's Hardware was a really pretty going concern. So one of these surviving, family stores. But again, this is where we're still in the urban area along this roadway at North Market, and we're going to move out into the Piedmont next. But before we do, we're going to talk about our Rivers. This is another famous building along North Market. It's a third generation family business, served the community flooring needs with high quality services since 1914. This type of commercial building, which is international style, is now being appreciated by the preservation community nationwide. That's another really fascinating kind of building there, with the facade, with the vertical horizontal facade and the aluminum and the big windows. Very interesting. And the sign is really cool too. Next. Again, another classic, former Post House restaurant. Papa Locridi, who served generations Delawareans for a half century. It closed in 2012. It's been utilized periodically again as a restaurant, not with the same kind of success as the Post House, but look at the terracotta roof and the entryway. A beautiful building there. And again, the temptation today is, consign these type of buildings to the, landfill, and to build something not nearly as architecturally significant or as well made. But hopefully we can continue to reuse this as a local eater. Next. So here we are at Philadelphia Pike at the base of Penny Hill. It's a pretty dramatic view from here. I don't know the photo really does it justice, but the Philadelphia Pike rises sharply into the Piedmont foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, which is situated on a giant banded gneiss shelf. That's what the blue rock is. It's not actually granite, it's gneiss, technically. Known as blue rock, was quarried locally to provide a durable building material. Those quarries, pretty much closed in the 70s. So we don't have any active quarrying of this material, which, was used to build so many walls, houses, buildings. And it's a very durable material. When the first trolley cars at the beginning of the 20th century traveled this route, they could not climb the grade and were forced to divert onto Hillcrest Avenue. In fact, on the very kind of top of the hill, there was a wart of stone. And that was very difficult for a trolley car to make that grade. And later, as the Philadelphia Pike was modernized, they removed that and gave us the smooth incline that's there today. Here's another view of the natural environment. Shellpot Creek, named by early Swedish settlers, one of the 4 Piedmont streams that bisect the Philadelphia Pike as it flowed to the Delaware River. We have 3 or 4 of these streams that flow out of the Piedmont and terminate in the Delaware River. It's rapidly flowing water stemming from the fall line. Again, the fall line where you get enough velocity in this water, you power grist mills. And this one had one in 1662. The name is derived from a Swedish word meaning turtle falls. Next. So another great story of preservation and struggle and never giving up, as it were. The Weldon House, preserved at last. The Weldon House was first built to support a small farm and wheelwright shop in the late 1770s by George Weldon. And you can go visit George Weldon's, grave. It's over at Newark Union. A blue rock and wood frame construction. The house was built on land owned by John Allman, who passed ownership on to his son, also named John. George Weldon married younger John's sister Elizabeth. The house is notably owned by Dr. Benjamin Vesey in the early 1900s, who operated as a medical practice from the house. Dr. Vesey served as a state senator, was one of the founders of the Wilmington Hospital. In the early 2000s, the property became endangered and sparked a major preservation effort. It is now owned by the Delaware Division of Cultural and Historical Affairs and undergoing major restoration. There's now thanks to Representative Heffernan, a $750,000 renovation budget. And we're hoping that probably in the spring, we're going to have a grand opening to reintroduce this property to the general public. So this is another, what I call landmark property in a lot of ways, not only for its historical value, but it also is a way to mark the original pathway of the Philadelphia Pike. So this property, which dates from 1790 in its earliest form, it has 5 major additions to it over time that they documented. But it truly is one of these properties, and you can go up the Philadelphia Pike. These type of properties demonstrate that the alignment of Philadelphia Pike remains very much what it was over 3 centuries. Next slide. I have to throw this one in. Rockwood Mansion. It's our county flagship property. We take a lot of pride. It's in my council district. This is a 150-year-old estate that is now Newcastle County Public Park, featuring a 6-acre historic garden, a mansion with a museum. The mansion, established by Joseph Shipley, is a wonderful example of rural Gothic revival architecture. Shipley spent a lot of his life, a very prominent merchant, spent a lot of his life in England. He took on a tremendous admiration for this aesthetic, which is English in its origin. He came here and built a replica of a mansion in England called Wingcote. But the one thing I want people to understand about this property, it is built out of our native bedrock, and it was quarried on the site, and it's a blue rock, and the stonework is superior. It doesn't, wear, and it just is a beautiful building. And we've done a lot of work on this elevation through our capital program, and it's really, it's really holding up well. We love Rockwood, and if you get a chance, you need to go visit Rockwood. It's also the intersection of Greenway pathways, and so I have to throw that in, pitching for the county. Thank you. Next one. This is another really interesting building right near the Philadelphia Pike. Sellers Carriage House, circa 1904, executed in the arts and crafts style. The Sellers Carriage House is made of the highest quality local blue rock, exhibits the finest masonry craftsmanship. It's been beautifully restored and serves as the clubhouse of the Paladin Club condominiums. William Sellers was an iron industrialist who owned the Edgemore Ironworks, which is on the site of the former DuPont Chemours Edgemore plant site. The iron that he produced went into the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge and the Eiffel Tower. He also invented the international screw thread standard. But this is on a property in its day was known as Clifton, and he had a mansion here, and this was the carriage house. Unfortunately, the mansion has been, again, torn down and thrown away. But at least we have this beautiful remnant carriage house, which just shows you the kind of quality that people invested in back in that era in the properties that they own. And this is worth a visit. You got to drive it back into Paladin Club, but it's intact. It's utilized, very much by those folks, and it's a great building. Next slide. So we're still on the Penny Hill section of the Pike. And this is another feature that's very prominent on the Philadelphia Pike, less so than it used to be, but the house lot is demarcated from the streetscape by a signature crenellated low stone wall. And these were put in the early 20th century, and they really are beautiful, well made, again, with that blue rock construction. These walls provide appealing visual texture and are an endangered historic landscape feature found along the Philadelphia Pike. This early 20th century four-square house adjacent to the Philadelphia Pike seats to grow out of the blue rock of the Piedmont with its first floor banded, blue Brandywine, blue nice stone construction. You see this a lot, you know, in the older areas in Brandywine 100. We have the first floor is stone and then a frame second story. Next slide. Penny House. Penny House, built by Arthur Penny, stands as a witness to the original alignment of Philadelphia Pike. Remember what I was saying before, how these houses do show you where the Pike is aligned. Dating from 1749, the Penny House has many uses of its long history, including reputed visits by important figures from the birth of our country. It was reportedly a toll house on the Philadelphia Turnpike during the Revolutionary War. Today, it is a private residence. And you know, this has a really amazing spring house behind it. And, you know, the story is people come and water their horses with a little pond back there. So it again is one of those buildings that, you know, early 18th century, still with us today. Next slide. This is next door to the Penny House, the Penny Bradford Mansion, circa 1800. Penny Bradford Mansion is set on a sweeping knoll. There's a separate carriage house building. It was a studio of Robert Shaw, a well-known local engraving artist. The mansion is an endangered historical landmark. It does seem like there's some work going on to reuse this. It's been vacant for many years. There seems to be an effort to, you know, kind of clean it up and reoccupy it. So we're crossing our fingers about that. Next slide. It's another example of a really interesting house. S. Marston Fox House. Home of S. Marston Fox, a pioneering civic leader of suburban Brandywine 100. He founded the Brandywine 100 Civic Association in 1948. His dedicated leadership established the Fox Point Park on the Delaware River. So this is a very large house perched on the top of the near the actually the Weldon House. It's a large frame home, exhibits high craftsman features and a crenellated stone wall. Inside of here is an engraving by Robert Shaw, a woodcut engraving over the fireplace. Really beautiful. Next one. Here we are at the summit of Penny Hill. We're looking down into the city. An underappreciated scenic view from the top of Penny Hill, looking down into the city of Wilmington. Truly a wonderful sight on a clear, cold night with the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. Years ago, the hill was not a smooth incline, as I mentioned before, and a hump that made the hill a much steeper grade. The Delaware Highway Commission blasted away the hump to reduce the grade. And again, I wish I had a photo. It really would demonstrate, you know, how really beautiful this view is. You know, really good, you know, when the air is really clear, you can see the roadway all the way out in the distance going into the city. Next slide. Another great property. It's now the Brandywine Valley Funeral Home. Grand home fronting the Philadelphia Pike has been saved and reused as one of the local area funeral parlors. Notice the low stone wall and how tastefully it accents the property. The Beesons were one of the original settling farm families in the area, and adjoining the street is named after them as well. Next. Pico's on Penny Hill. So another example of a building that had a mix of uses. The family used to live in this building and have the frontage. The liquor store is a fine example of residential building with a commercial storefront. Again, this was very common in the Philadelphia Pike. A type of mixed-use building, and the brick construction provides a contrast to the stone buildings in the area. Next slide. Delaware State Police Troop 1. Based in this fine brick barracks in historic Penny Hill, the Delaware State Troop protect us on our state roads. State troopers once patrolled the entire state of Delaware from this location. And back in the day, you know, back in the 20s, they had a real like little kind of wooden shack. This dates from the 60s. And they patrolled, literally, they did a patrol from the top of Delaware to the bottom and back again. And it took them like 2 weeks. So those days, interesting. You know, next slide. This is now gone. the farmer stand at corner of Washington Street in Philadelphia Pike was a vibrant farm stand enjoyed by all citizens of the community. At one time, this was a gas station. It was reverted to another use, but now this has been torn down and removed. It's a shame, because it was an attractive property and stay. People would stop in here and enjoy that farm stand general store. Next slide. Here's a really fascinating place. Corn Court, a rare example of a California bungalow court located just off the Philadelphia Pike, developed in 1923 by Claude Banta, demonstrates the eclectic nature of housing development in the vicinity of Philadelphia Pike corridor. So this is only half realized. He built, this California bungalow court, which has an alleyway behind, garages, and a common walking area at the front of the entrance of the buildings. And, again, half realized, sold, it didn't sell very well. I think he ran into financial trouble, but the rest of the project is a very conventional kind of suburban development. But this bungalow court enjoys tremendous popularity. People love living there. And it's a really another kind of interesting community to go walk through and visit. Next slide. Here we have a kind of tremendous loss for the areas. The old Strawbridge and Clothier, this was at the Merchant Square. This 1951 mid-century modern department store was located in Merchant Square. After years of vacancy, it was demolished. All these rare buildings enriched our communities are destroyed. We lose a piece of our local identity. This building was so robustly built, they had a heck of a time tearing it down. I mean, it just took them a long, long time. It had a civil defense shelter built in the basement, and it has a really beautiful, I call it like a kind of international late Art Deco style, but it's gone now. Move on. Here we go, kind of moving up further away, Marcus Hook Range rear light. One of the things you have to understand about our communities, they had orientation to the river and affected by all the things that go on in the river. Delaware River is a major commercial shipping and industrial shipping route. Many ships traversing north and south on the river. And this Marcus Hook Range rear light was built just prior to World War I as a few square concrete lighthouses in the United States and purportedly the highest light on the East Coast. And what this does is it navigational aid still to this day. That structure is maintained by the Coast Guard, and that provides an active navigational aid for ships traversing up and down the Delaware River. Next slide. This is a very historic community right adjacent to Philadelphia Pike, and they actually have frontage on the Philadelphia Pike. Town of Bellefonte. Here we have downtown Bellefonte, incorporated in 1915. Town of Bellefonte, originally known as Montrose, is part of the Philadelphia Pike area, and also has local residents, a great variety of shops and eateries. A stroll in downtown Bellefonte is a delightful experience. They have a town commission. They're a charter municipality. They've done a lot of great work in the last 20 years to enhance the town. And it really is kind of a trolley car community in its early days. And the symbol of the town of Bellefonte is the trolley car. Next slide. Okay, of course, I got to talk about our fire companies. Local citizens are grateful to dedicated volunteers who always respond to calls for help from this first fire company organized in Brandywine 100, probably like 1924. They're coming up on 100 years of existence. It's pretty significant. A local longest center of community activity, the Brandywine 100 Fire Hall sits on the heart of the town of Bellefonte. Next slide. Here's your municipal complex for Bellefonte. This is their town hall. It's an old Methodist church, repurposed. They didn't tear it down, they repurposed it. Housed in a former church's simple, elegant building, offers the town of Bellefonte a distinctive town government identity. The town commission is composed of volunteers who work hard to improve quality of life for the residents of Bellefonte. They have a town park associated with this. It's also been renovated and they've done a great job, especially the last 20 years or so. Next slide. Here's another really significant building, Chambers Mansion, circa 1890. Chambers Mansion is an example of Victorian architecture near the town of Bellefonte. Notice that the house has twin towers and it's constructed of blue rock and wood frame with a massive enveloping porch. You know, again, that concept of first stories out of blue rock and second stories out of frame construction. There's actually a ballroom in the top of that house. I've been in it. It's an amazing property. Next slide. It's another example of kind of typical architecture. The house is a classic representative of the early suburban Eastern Brandywine home built at the turn of the 20th century with a full width front porch and front steps. It invites neighbors to visit. Noteworthy as well as a signature low stone wall comprised of locally quarried blue rock. Yeah, Bellefonte Bungalow. Next one. This is a building that I'm still trying to identify this, but situated in the town of Bellefonte. It's perched. This large house is perched on the ridge to take advantage of the river views. That's another thing that was done as the early, settlement and early construction. People built their houses on the ridge. A lot of times the farmland ran down to the river and they had the river view as part of the house. It may have an 18th century stone house as a core and other additions were added later. This is a typical development of the early stone farmhouses in the area. Next slide. Now we're moving on to Bellevue up the Philadelphia Pike. This is looking into Bellevue State Park. This 18th century house on the grounds of the Bellevue State Park had additions built on it over the years. Again, very typical. It also marks the original alignment of the historic roadway. Next slide. This is within Bellevue Park, Bellevue Hall. And it's the former DuPont family estate, which really what Bellevue State Park is, that estate. It includes a 1.8 mile horse track purchased by the state of Delaware in 1976, is now beautiful 320 acre state park. A caretaker house built by previous owner C.R. Griggs marks its entry from the Philadelphia Pike. Next slide. Here again, Philadelphia Pike, Road of American Independence. The National Park Service recognized the Philadelphia Pike as part of the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route from Newport, Rhode Island to Yorktown, VA, which saw the largest Allied troop movement of the war. Our French allies were crucial in the final defeat of the British at the Battle of Yorktown. Next. So we're moving along on the road going north from Bellevue to Holyoke. Looking north on the Philadelphia Pike, the road undulates following the contour of the ridge, which slopes off to the east toward the Delaware River. So on your right-hand side is where you're going north, is where the river lies. Next. Mount Pleasant, the 19th century Mount Pleasant Methodist Episcopal Meeting House and Cemetery is located on the grounds of the Bellevue State Park. And that's a really interesting site to go visit. To visit that cemetery, you can see a lot of the early farm families, founding families of Brandywine 100 are interred in their cemetery. And again, here's another really great piece of architecture. The Mount Pleasant School near Philadelphia Pike, built in 1932, where we had an era of like colonial revival. The original school building was built in 1829, is now on what is now Bellevue State Park, but you can see the cupola, again, kind of like folks in that time looking back to the architectural roots of the country. It's kind of got a federal or kind of, kind of federal style kind of look to it, or Georgian, but, with that nice cupola. And that building continues to serve the public today. It's a very successful school building. Next slide. Another one of my favorite places to visit, and here you can take in the full, views that are afforded when you're on the Piedmont looking over the Delaware River. A Caulfield Estate, circa 1920. And the house, the grounds of the Caulfield estate provides the last clear viewscape of the Delaware River from the Philadelphia Pike. Maybe not the last one, but one of the few. On a nice day, visitors can enjoy the view and watch the ships go by. So Mr. Caulfield was a real estate advisor at T. Coleman DuPont, and he built the house as a summer home for his wife and 7 children. After Mr. and Mrs. Caulfield died in the 1950s, 2 of the children lived in the house until they sold the property estate for all to enjoy. So, you know, that colonial revival home was fantastic. You know, they'll let you go in there and have a look. It's all intact inside, like all the original kind of features that were in the house, the kitchen and the bathrooms in the living and dining room, all original features, magnificently preserved. And today you can rent that property for an event. So it's really another great property that's been saved for time. Next slide. Again, we're coming into Hollyoak, community I live in. And this is another, you know, I think noteworthy building. St. Peter and Paul Ukrainian Orthodox Church with its dome sanctuary is one of the more unique buildings found in the Hollyoak section of the Philadelphia Pike. And in suburban Newcastle County, there are very few dome buildings. And this is one of the great examples. And this dates, I think, from the 50s when this was constructed. And they continue, that congregation continues to worship there. And it's also utilized by a local Boy Scout troop. It's a great building, and we continue to enjoy it as a kind of landmark on the Philadelphia Pike. Next is in Hollyoak again, another one of these bungalow houses. I call it an ultimate bungalow. It's kind of very large. It's a celebration of stone construction again. Stone pillars on the front porch suggest strength and durability. Again, this building material, this blue rock, widely used in the early days, especially in the early 20th century. Next slide. It's another great hidden architectural gem. This Hollyoak Queen Anne style survives the Victorian period to this day. This fine example is hidden by a long driveway in the Hollyoak area. So beautiful, but again, this is interesting. It's brick, it's not stone. So they kind of went off key with that, but that's fine. It's still beautiful. Next, Perkins Farmhouse gives you an idea of the roots of the area. Perkins Farmhouse, 1779. The Perkins, an early local farm family, obtained the land patent for their farm in 1693 and built the Joseph Perkins Farm almost a century later. The house faces the Delaware River along the crest of the ridge, and the farm stretched in its day stretched to the river. Perkins Run is a local stream named after the family. Next slide. Now we're going to transit into Claymont portion of the Philadelphia Pike. But again, in that top slide, you can see how the road kind of undulates down and rises up. The area known as Claymont has been continuously occupied since 1200 AD, previously named after the first name nation chief Naaman. That's in its early, days, very early days. It was later renamed Claymont in 1856 by Pastor Clemson of the Episcopal Church for his family plantation, Claymont Court in Charleston, West Virginia. Probably a lot of people don't know that story. Claymont has been an active thoroughfare from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. since the colonial era. The Claymont Renaissance Development Corporation has worked hard to attract new businesses and residents to the area. And it is also a major policy and planning focus for Newcastle County government. Next slide. And I call Claymont an unincorporated town. They have a strong local and town identity, but no real local government per se. So this is another noteworthy feature of Claymont, the Claymont Company Villages. Overlook Colony. Overlook Colony was built by the General Chemical Company in the early 1910s to house workers and their families. This community was designed by a famous landscape architect, John Nolan. He also did Union Park Gardens in Wilmington. The buildings were designed by New York City architect Errol Coffin. Some of the houses are built using cinders from the chemical company. And again, this is a kind of English style. It has Tudor quality to it, arts and crafts quality. It's very interesting blend of these architectural forms. This was only half realized, and but it's still there, and we're doing a lot of work to enhance Overlook Colony and bring it back. And it's another community that is again, these company villages, very unique. I think in Newcastle County, and makes Claymont stand out. Next slide. More features of Overlook Colony. Redmond's Hall, community building for Overlook Colony. We host the organizational meeting for the Claymont Fire Company. Commonwealth Avenue, attractive entry boulevard, features a landscape median. And again, these communities were kind of master planned, and their design work in them is excellent, and the architecture is also noteworthy. We're working on our best to preserve these type of communities and enhance them for continued vitality and future use. Next slide. So here, another interesting community. Today's Knollwood, yesterday's Worthland. Built by Worth Steel Company circa 1917 to house its Caucasian employees. Its many amenities included a school and a restaurant. The main office building for the mill was built on the Philadelphia Pike, while the community was built on a hilltop. The mill was on the bottom of the hill. So the idea with this is, with these company villages, is people were housed here and they walked to work. And that's how it was done. And that was seen as a very progressive thing in the day. This community just celebrated its 102nd anniversary. Couldn't meet to celebrate it during the pandemic, but it's now over a century old. And a lot of great things are going on in Knollwood, and I work very closely with the local community to enhance that community and really celebrate its heritage. Next slide. Another very interesting community, Hickman Row, designed and built to house Worth Steel's African-American employees. It remains an important community for Claymont's African-American citizens. It is listed on the National Historic Register of Historic Places. And this is a thing you got to go hunt for it a little bit. It's off a road called Hickman Road, off Naaman's Road, going toward Pennsylvania. And there it is. It's 2 blocks of these brick houses, and it's very well maintained. People still take a lot of pride in it as a nice historical marker. I should get that in the slide, but another really fascinating place that kind of has a kind of a legacy of racism, but if you research into the history of desegregation in the United States, there was the Claymont 12, where the Claymont School District voluntarily desegregated its high school. That formed a lot of the basis of eventually became Brown versus Board of Education. It was part of that case history. The Claymont 12 came from Hickman Row. So there, it's noteworthy as a civil rights kind of heritage building and heritage place. Next slide. So we're going to transition now to go into the kind of industrial zone along the Philadelphia Pike. Next slide. You have Worth Steel. Now this has been completely removed, but in its day, it employed hundreds of people, provided a critical raw material, or not raw material, but steel for structures, armor plate. It was a very small mill, kind of a mini mill, but it had a long run. It was in existence, well over a century, and then it finally went to closure. But a lot of the local people in the Claymont vicinity worked at this mill, and it provided an important, source of employment, as well as that critical, steel material for the construction of infrastructure and other uses. Next slide. again, in the end, was owned by actually the Russians. It was Evraz Steel. In the very end, that brick building that's on the left, that's the administrative center of the steel mill. And fortunately, that building has been saved and is being reutilized as a residential drug treatment facility by Gaudenzia. So again, it's a really magnificent, brick building, and I'd hesitate to pronounce on its architectural style. It's kind of a little bit of everything, and it's being reused, and we're glad to see that happen. The rest of the mill, of course, you can see, next. So today, a redevelopment project, 479 acres, and this old steel mill has been removed. Next slide. We're kind of the extreme terminus of the pathway and the vicinity of the communities. Aniline Village, another community built by General Chemical to house employees. Aniline Village sits on the Pennsylvania state line. General Chemical, now in business, was founded in 1899, one of the early chemical businesses in the United States. But again, if you peel back all the layers there, though, you could see these buildings were built with a tremendous amount of architectural detail, and nice construction. And again, while we repurpose all these industrial uses in the vicinity, we want to protect these remnant communities for the architectural excellence and the real heritage value they have even today. Move on, next slide. Another fire company, Claymont Fire Company, founded in 1928. Claymont Volunteer Fire Company is built on land generously leased by the volunteer firefighter James McNulty for $25 a year. The station now shows a bold new facade on the Philadelphia Pike location, and that's a $5 million addition, tastefully done, beautiful, durable architecture, really enhances the streetscape. They did a fabulous job with that, and was one of the early, new buildings and new construction as part of the Claymont Renaissance. Next slide. Here's a view, another view. Philadelphia Pike and Governor Prince Curve. The flags flying high over Claymont's War Memorial honors citizens killed in our country. The sweeping curves of the Governor Prince offer dramatic views of the Delaware River in New Jersey. This is another place where you have the elevated view looking at the river. There's a little interesting story about that war memorial, which dates back to quite far in the past. Actually, I think, it may be World War I period. DelDOT wanted to get rid of this war memorial. Well, I can tell you, it's still there today. So no one was going to remove that. Downtown Claymont, kind of going back down into town. Here you can see all the different features that are in downtown Claymont. This Joe and Tony's garage, really interesting early automobile repair and gas stop. It's been fantastically renovated and reused, not torn down, and has a good story. But again, you can see the density of small businesses along the Philadelphia Pike and Claymont. And that water tower, that's from the old Brookview apartment complex. I'm trying to get them to paint that and outline it in neon. So I've seen that done in Baltimore, but today that's valuable to the project owners because it's festooned with all these transducers for cell phone transmission. Next slide. Again, this zooming in on this, Joe and Tony's Gulf Service Station. It's no longer Joe and Tony's, but it was founded in 1942, one of the oldest continuous operating Gulf stations in the United States. It's got an arts and crafts feel to it, I think. But again, it's another kind of mixed use building. You got a big auto repair bay in there. You drive your car in. It's not like, the more modern place. You have a tunnel you drive through and there's all these bays in there. But above that is an apartment. So, and it's being reused and refitted and renovated. It's a beautiful still beautiful and still functioning as it was intended. And it's, again, not one of these pieces of throwaway architecture or building. It definitely has permanence and quality to it. Next slide. Again, one of the other great buildings, Archmere Academy. This Italian estate was owned by Joseph Raskob, vice president of both DuPont and General Motors companies, and he financed the Empire State Building. The estate was purchased in 1932 by the Norbertine Abbott Bernard Pennings. The former all-boys boarding and day school went co-ed in 1975. One of the famous alumnus is President Joseph Biden. So this building, the Raskobs admired this Italian. It's just sort of has no context to the area, and it's just here. And they built this Italian style, mansion as a central atrium to it called the patio. And today they don't use this as a school building. It's an event space. And you can rent that for wedding receptions, birthdays, what have you. And it has a magnificent stained glass ceiling that in its day used to roll back. They don't dare do that today, but it's all intact, all there, as Raskob had designed it. And the one other aspect of this, it's a little bit, kind of not so good, is that it's made out of a sandstone, and they brought it here. It's not made out of the local blue rock, and it's having trouble because it's tending to, the building exteriors tending to be eroded by, the weather here. So they're going to have a major job protecting the skin of that stone building from continued erosion. But it's magnificent, and it just right off the Philadelphia Pike. You can drive up and look down the gate, and that's what you'll see, the gate in the picture, and that's what you see. Next slide. Some more great houses in Claymont. A lot of great old buildings, residential homes. People take a lot of pride in them. Still, are very much sought after in real estate in the area, and enjoy a lot of popularity. Next slide. More great houses. This is a really interesting one. The one on the left, Manor Avenue. This house with its distinctive triangular dormers and feature windows, a rare example of East Lake design aesthetic, a precursor to the arts and crafts style. It's just really got all kinds of details on it that are the balusters are interesting on the railing on the porch, and the way it is with the all the different elevations, and it's a fascinating building. Here's another one. Okay, we're going to go to the Claymont Stone School, Philadelphia Pike and Darley Road. Claymont Stone School is Claymont's one-room schoolhouse. The school is built on land deeded over for this purpose by founding father John Dickinson in 1805. Another great save from demolition, restored and expanded and updated. The school provides the community programs celebrating Claymont's history. This was saved by, the Old Stone School, nonprofit, and they were able to get a lot of state money to renovate the building and make it, suitable for the modern uses today. And it's another great preservation effort. Next slide. One of the other really fascinating houses in Claymont, Darley House, the Wren's Nest. Again, right on the Philadelphia Pike. The Darley House was the home of Felix Darley, a leading 19th century illustrator. Two of his works include The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. The house was put on that National Registry of Historic Places in 1974 and protected by Newcastle County Historic Zoning in 2010. The property is owned by the state of Delaware and recently renovated for community nonprofit use. And Felix Darley was a very big deal in his day. He illustrated for all the major authors, Dickens, Washington Irving. He, along with Tom Nass, did the first modern depiction of Santa Claus that's still with us today. Santa Claus is the delightful, elfish kind of guy. He's part of that change. And but Darley House still used. It's now an art center and used to celebrate local art, give art instruction, a really great success story, and saved from, demolition. Next one. Ascension Episcopal Church. This church was moved from its original location on the east side of Philadelphia Pike to its current location on the west side. This church has a reception and press conference for community after the annual Claymont Christmas Parade. Another great, building, kind of Gothic revival, wood, and then a stone building was built as an addition as a church hall later on. But they moved it from one side of the Pike to the other. Again, back in the day and back in the, when buildings were hard to come by and expensive and really not throwaway, people saved these buildings. Next slide. We're coming to the conclusion of this PowerPoint presentation. Robinson House, end of the Philadelphia Pike. We're in the Delaware and Pennsylvania state line. This is an incredibly valuable property and dated from 1723. The house was owned by Colonel Thomas Robinson, a Revolutionary War hero, and is probably the most noteworthy building on historic Philadelphia Pike. Once a roadhouse and formerly known as the Naaman's Tea House, the building has been extensively restored. It is a great place to host upscale events. Famous guests included George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette, and Light Horse Harry Lee. It is now owned by the state of Delaware, managed by a nonprofit. The Claymont Historical Society has taken residence in the Robinson House, and we're looking forward. They're going to do a public event here, hopefully later in the fall, to open it up after COVID pandemic for the public to view. I've been here when I launched my campaign as a councilman in 2004. I did that announcement from this building, and it sort of is the end. And there's a stone marker on the lawn here, the stone marker, and there's another one in Philadelphia. It's 20 miles to Philadelphia from this building. So,
sorry, I threw one last in.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, this is another really, again, the eclectic nature of all these heritage structures. This is, I call it the atomic era gas station with the flying canopy, sort of like late Art Deco. And this building, when David Ames did the study, he was drawn to this. He said, you guys need to save this building. There aren't many of these left. It's an old service station, but it has that big flying canopy. It's kind of got like Frank Lloyd Wright-ish kind of sensibility to it as well. And it had a rotating sign on top of the thing at the end, the support pillar at the end. And we can't have rotating signs in Newcastle County, but we're trying to craft an exception in our hometown overlay there to allow that sign to once again rotate and advertise. And today there's a local business owner, John, his name, Uncle John, that we call him, and he uses this as an event space and food truck, and he's done a lot of great work to it. So again, these buildings can continue to be repurposed, live on, and provide centers of community activity like this. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something about the picturesque and significant Philadelphia Pike corridor and the important stories of our oldest Brandywine 100 communities. This scenic and historic byway has many fine local businesses, parks, and historic attractions. Please come experience in Philadelphia Pike and its surrounding distinctive neighborhoods. Thank you for this, to Deep and all the members of PDI, for this invitation to present this to you. And I hope I didn't bore you, and I hope you enjoyed what I presented today.
John, thank you. I always love visiting Philadelphia Pike through your eyes. So it's just awesome. Alex, I don't know if you're there, if we have any time for one or two questions. I have not had a chance to look through the Q&A, but if there's any that you've seen that we could hit quick.
I am here. I think we could probably do one, but then we do need to let our next presenters queue up. So let me see here. Oh, how about this one? Okay. Are there any areas along Philadelphia Pike that have a historic preservation commission for review and assistance?
No, we don't have that, you know, we function with, we have an historical society in Claymont. We have, you know, Newcastle County has an historical zoning process where we can nominate properties for historical zoning, which is a very strong kind of protection. And then, of course, on the state level, you have, and the national level, you have the, you know, the historic designation you get on the national level, but per se, there's no historical commission per se. We have a lot of people that are very interested in heritage. We do have an historical society in Claymont. And, you know, that's kind of the extent of it.
There, you do have the Claymont DRAC, right? Does that include
Well, the
any of?
Design Review Advisory Committee is not really about history or heritage per se. It's
But for
kind of
design review?
design review for new projects
Yeah, yeah. Anything that's in that zone,
in that hometown overlay, yeah.
yeah. And there, sorry, Alex, there is a question about reviving the effort to make it a scenic byway, or really it should be called a byway, because it's not scenic, but the program's not called scenic byways anymore, because one of the 6 intrinsic qualities is historic.
Yes.
And so that is something that John is interested in doing, and we've been in conversations with Delaware about trying to revisit it, and we need to that there was an effort years ago, several years ago, but we need to revisit it and try to maybe tell the story in a new way. So Alex, should we wrap that up then?
I think we probably should,
Okay.
but you know, I guess John, if you would be okay with this, you know, if folks have questions about Philadelphia Pike, you know, I would encourage them to maybe get in touch with you if that would be okay, if you'd be willing to talk about it more with folks.
I'll talk about it endlessly. No problem.
John,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thank
This
you,
is
Dee.
awesome.
Thank you, Preservation Delaware. Keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Thanks so much.
Take
Okay.
care.
Thank you so much. And so our next presentation is going to start shortly at 9:45. So we're going to close this room to give them a chance to get in and get settled. But you can use the same link to join that you used for the presentation this morning. So I hope to see you all at 9:45. Thanks.